The last passenger. It started on one of those nights when the world felt heavier than usual, the kind where the damp air settled in your lungs like regret. The midnight shift on Route 17 was always quiet, a lonely stretch of looping roads and half-empty stops where the city blurred into something closer to a forgotten dream. No one really rode that late except the stragglers, those who had nowhere urgent to be or no one waiting for them when they got there. I'd driven the route for years, knew every flicker of the sodium lights, every pothole and bend, every regular face, and the way loneliness clung to some passengers like an old coat. But then, one night, he appeared. It was the Maple Avenue stop. Rain had slicked the pavement, turning the glass of the shelter into a blurry reflection of the street lamp. He was just there. Standing in the shadows, head down, hands in the pockets of a threadbare gray coat. When I pulled up, he boarded without a word, moving like he was heavier than he should be, the way people move when they've been on their feet too long. His fare was exact, dropped into the box with a soft clink of coins, but he never looked up. Just walked to the very back, sank into the seat as if he was melting into the vinyl. I remember glancing in the mirror. He kept his head down, staring at his feet like he was trying to count the seconds ticking by. At first, I thought nothing of it. People like that passed through all the time. The ones with tired faces and secrets buried too deep to share. But he came back. The next night. Same stop. Same silence. Same seat at the back. And then the next night. I started watching him. Couldn't help it. He never missed a night, never said a word. Never made eye contact. Just sat there. Sometimes, I'd catch his reflection in the mirror, pale and gaunt under the buzzing fluorescence, like the color had drained out of him. Once, I thought he was humming. A low, breathy sound, barely more than a vibration. But when I turned my head, he was silent. Still. Passengers changed. Routes shifted slightly. But he was constant. The man in gray. And then, about a week in, something changed. I noticed he was sitting closer. Not much. Just a row forward. I told myself I was imagining it. But the next night, he moved again. Always forward. Always silent. The passengers thinned out even more, winter was creeping in, and the night crowd dwindled to a handful of regulars. But he never missed a ride. Closer. One row. Then another. I started to feel it. The weight of him. Not just his presence, the space he took up seemed off. Like he wasn't fully there but pressing against the air, stretching it. The kind of wrong you felt more than saw. One night, the rain was heavier, blurring the windshield. He was the only one on the bus. Sitting just 5 rows back. I kept checking the mirror, trying not to. But it was like he wanted me to. The hum returned, louder. A note too low to be music, more like a vibration running through the floor, rattling in my chest. I almost spoke to him. Almost. But something held my tongue. The kind of instinct you don't question, the same one that stops you from opening a door when the hairs on your neck rise. I didn't sleep well after that. Kept thinking of those pale hands, the gray coat damp from rain, the way he never seemed to blink. And he was getting closer. Closer. The space between us shrinking with each shift. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress. The late hours. But then, I checked the security footage from the last 2 weeks. He was there. Every night. But the footage, it didn't make sense. Each night, he sat closer to the camera. But earlier, the first few nights? There was no one in the back of the bus at all. Not on the footage. But I remembered him. The damp coat. The hum. The way the bus felt heavier. That night, I made up my mind. I wasn't leaving the bus alone. I'd confront him. Demand answers. But the problem with plans is, they don't always hold up when the shadows start moving. The next night, the rain had stopped, but the air hung thick, pressing against the windows like a held breath. My stomach felt knotted the whole drive-in, like something coiled too tight, ready to snap. I kept checking the mirror, even when the seats were empty. Waiting for him. Maple Avenue stop. Always Maple Avenue. The street lamp flickered, struggling to stay lit. And there he was. Standing just outside the shelter, that gray coat clinging damply to his frame. But something was wrong this time. The way he stood, too still. Too expectant. Like he'd been waiting not for the bus, but for me. The door hissed open. My hand hovered near the lever. A part of me hoped he wouldn't step on. That maybe tonight, he'd just stay there. But no. He climbed aboard, slower than usual. The coins rattled as they dropped, too loud. Too sharp. His face still half hidden, but I could see the edge of his cheek. Pale. Sallow. Sunken in a way that felt wrong. He didn't go to the back. He sat just 2 rows behind me. Closer. The bus felt colder. The kind of chill that sank under your skin, as if the windows weren't sealed anymore, or the night air had found a way inside. I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel too tight. Focused on the road. Focused on the stops. Empty stops, all of them. No other passengers. I could feel him. Watching. Not moving. Not making a sound. Just there. The hum had returned, vibrating up through the seat this time. Stronger. Rhythmic. It wasn't humming. It was breathing. I gritted my teeth, trying to ignore the pulse of it. The way it felt too slow, like something struggling to pretend it was alive. My mind was racing, thinking of all the stories you hear when you work nights long enough. Drivers whisper about strange fares. People who get on, but never get off. Or get off, but leave something behind. Things worse than forgotten wallets or gloves. At the next stop, I killed the engine and turned. Hey. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. You need to get off here? No answer. He didn't look up. But his hands, they had shifted. Fingers pale, bony, gripped the edge of the seat like he was bracing for something. Another stop. Another. I felt it, he was closer. But he hadn't moved. Hadn't made a sound. Still, that presence was pressing in. Thicker. Heavier. Like the air was folding around him, stretching the space. My heart was racing now, the sound of my pulse too loud in my ears. Something was wrong with the mirrors. The glass seemed off. Like the reflection wasn't quite right. The shape of him was there, but blurred, edges rippling like heat distortion. And then, just as I was about to speak again, he stood. No sound. No warning. Just rising, his face still angled down, obscured by the low brim of the hood. He didn't move toward the door. He moved toward me. I hit the brakes hard. The bus jolted. The engine wheezed. For a breathless second, everything was frozen. His hands hung limp at his sides now. The breathing sound stopped. And then, he lifted his head. It wasn't a face. Not anymore. The skin was stretched too thin, pale as candle wax. The eyes, no, not eyes. Black pits, empty and cavernous, like the sockets had collapsed inward. But the mouth, there was a mouth, twisted into a shape that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite anything human. He whispered something. Or maybe I imagined it. I think it was my name. But no one had called me by name that night. My badge was flipped. He shouldn't have known it. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember hitting the gas or careening through the empty streets. I just remember the sound of the engine roaring, the bus shuddering, and the gray figure still standing there, closer. Always closer. And then, he was gone. Vanished. Like he'd never been there. But the seat was still wet. And when I checked the footage the next morning, the bus had been empty. The footage was clear. Crystal clear, in fact. No sign of him. The seat he'd been in was empty. The air in the bus felt lighter, like the pressure had lifted. The moment had passed, right? Just a trick of the mind. Maybe I'd been so exhausted, I'd imagined the whole thing. That's what I kept telling myself. But I couldn't shake it. The feeling. That hum in my chest. The weight of his absence. I checked the timestamps, replayed the footage over and over, but nothing. He wasn't there. But I knew what I'd seen. I called in sick the next night. Couldn't bring myself to get behind the wheel again. The thought of him, closer, always closer. It gnawed at me. I didn't want to confront it, didn't want to question it. I stayed home, hoping the nightmares wouldn't follow me. Hoping the bus, that route, would disappear from my life like some bad memory. But it didn't. The next week, I found myself back on the same shift. And there he was. Maple Avenue stop. Same gray coat, same silence, same empty stare. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stopped the bus, slammed the door shut, and walked to the back. He hadn't moved. His hands were still folded in his lap, his eyes locked on the floor, but I could feel the hum again. Soft at first. Like it was trying to coax me closer. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Who are you?" I said. "What do you want?" No response. Not even a twitch. "You've been on this bus for weeks," I pressed. "You've been sitting there. Watching me. What is this? What are you?" He didn't speak. Didn't even move. But that's when I felt it, a cold chill, wrapping itself around my neck, curling into my lungs. Like the air had gone stale, thick with something ancient. Something that had been waiting, watching, for a long time. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small mark on the floor. Barely visible, but unmistakable. A footprint. Fresh. Damp. Not mine. I took a step back, heart racing. The man in the gray coat hadn't moved an inch. But I was sure of it now, he hadn't just been riding the bus. He had been here, for years. "Why haven't you left?" I asked, my voice trembling now. "Why won't you leave?" The hum was louder now, vibrating the floor beneath my feet. I looked down, and there it was, another mark, like a smear. A trail leading straight to the door. I backed away, trying to steady my breathing. But before I could reach the door, it slammed shut, as if it had been waiting for me to move. I turned, my pulse pounding, only to find the bus empty. Completely empty. But the marks, they were still there. The dampness. The smell of rain, and something else. Something old. Something dead. I turned to the rearview mirror. The reflection. The seat where he had sat was gone. The seat was dry. But something else was different. In the mirror, I could see him. Standing right behind me. Just as he had before. And this time, he was smiling. The smile stretched across his face, grotesque and unnatural, the kind of smile you'd see on someone who had forgotten what it was like to feel anything real. It was as though his mouth had been carved into that shape, the edges pulling at skin that wasn't meant to stretch that far. His eyes, those empty, hollow sockets, stared into mine through the reflection. He wasn't close, not physically, but his presence had closed in on me like a suffocating fog. I couldn't breathe. I don't know how long we stayed like that, him standing in the mirror, staring at me with that awful, unblinking grin, and me frozen in place, every instinct screaming to get away. The air felt thick, heavier than before. It was as if the very fabric of reality around me had started to bend. I could hear the sound of my own heart hammering, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. And then, I heard it. A whisper. So faint I wasn't sure if it was real, or if my mind was breaking under the pressure. Leave. The word was like a rasp of dry air through cracked lips. My fingers trembled on the steering wheel, too afraid to turn around, too afraid not to. But I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I turned my head. Nothing. The bus was empty. Completely empty. The seat behind me was empty. The aisle was empty. I looked to the mirrors, nothing. I hit the brakes hard, feeling the panic rising in my chest, but the bus was still. Silent. Dead silent. The only sound was the thrum of the engine, the only motion the slight sway of the vehicle as I breathed. I was alone. Except for him. I don't know what happened after that. My mind, it snapped. I couldn't make sense of it anymore. The lines between what was real and what wasn't had blurred so badly, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I drove without thinking, just driving, the road ahead stretching endlessly into the dark. The lights of the city flickered as I passed, but I didn't see them anymore. I was somewhere else. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see. I didn't know where I was going. And then, suddenly, I stopped. I don't remember how. I don't remember pulling over. I don't remember the exact moment the bus came to a halt. But when I did stop, it was the middle of nowhere. The world outside was still. Silent. Like time itself had stopped. The rain had come back, falling in soft sheets against the windows, casting everything in a dim, gray glow. I looked around, but there were no other cars, no people. No lights. Nothing. The bus felt like the last thing left in the world. I checked the rearview mirror again. And there he was. Not in the reflection, but standing in the aisle, right behind me. His coat was soaked through, dripping onto the floor. But he was closer now. Much closer. His face, it was no longer a mask of flesh and bone. It had melted. The skin was gone, the muscles twisted beneath, and what remained was a mess of raw, exposed tissue. He was no longer human. Not in any way I could understand. But those black pits where his eyes should have been, those eyes, they were still there. And they were staring at me. Why don't you leave? I heard my voice whisper, but it wasn't my voice. It was hoarse, as if I hadn't spoken in years. He took a slow step forward, dragging his feet like something was anchoring him down. The air was so thick now I could taste it, metallic, sour. And then, he was right there. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. And then, without any warning, he spoke. His voice was a low, rasping thing, like it came from the depths of something ancient, something long forgotten. I've never left. I don't remember what happened next. The world went dark. I don't know if I fainted or if I just stopped existing for a moment. When I woke up, the bus was back on its usual route, the lights flickering against the rain-soaked windows. I was driving. But the seat behind me was empty. I checked the rearview mirror. The man in the gray coat was gone. But I knew he was still there. Still following, still waiting. Somewhere. I could feel him. I could feel him in the hum beneath the floor, in the breath of the night, in the damp air that clung to the glass. He never left. And I never will either. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. It could have been days, weeks, or longer. Time's become a blur. The bus route? It's the same every night, every stop. I've tried to quit, tried to walk away, but something keeps pulling me back. The hours when I'm not driving feel hollow. Like I'm floating through a world that doesn't quite make sense anymore. I keep hearing that whisper in the back of my head, I've never left. I can't shake it. People still get on the bus, but they're different now. Strangers, all of them, but somehow, familiar. Their faces blur, their voices echo in a way that feels distant, as if they're not really there at all. The passengers sit in their usual spots, but none of them look me in the eye. They all stare at the floor, just like he used to. Just like the man in the gray coat. I know he's still out there. I can feel him, lurking in the dark, waiting for me to make another mistake. Every time the bus stops, I brace myself, my heart pounding. Is it tonight? Is he getting on? The first time it happened, I thought I was imagining it, this strange feeling that he was there, even when I couldn't see him. But now? Now I know better. Every night, I feel his presence in the air, thick and heavy. Like I'm never truly alone anymore. And then, last night, it happened again. That feeling, that unmistakable hum, vibrating through the floorboards, through the seat beneath me, through my very bones. I knew. I knew before I even checked the rearview mirror. But this time, I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. This time, I was ready. I slammed on the brakes, the screech of the tires biting through the silence of the night. The bus came to a stop, the headlights cutting through the fog, illuminating the wet street ahead of me. I could feel him, closer than ever, his cold breath creeping up my neck. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A shadow. But not just any shadow. It was him. The man in the gray coat. But this time, he wasn't standing in the aisle. This time, he was sitting in one of the seats. His head tilted to the side, his eyes, those hollow, black pits, staring straight at me, unblinking. His lips curled into that same, twisted smile. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get out of the bus, run away, leave this nightmare behind me. But another part of me, a darker part, wanted to confront him. I wanted to know what the hell he was. I wanted to ask him why. Why had he chosen me? But I couldn't speak. My throat had gone dry, like all the moisture had been sucked out of my body. My heart was hammering in my chest. And the bus? It felt different. It was colder now, as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees. And that hum? It was louder. Louder than before. It was coming from everywhere, under the floor, through the walls, from behind me. It was everywhere. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, I heard a voice. A voice that wasn't mine. Leave. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a plea. It was just a fact. I didn't want to listen, but I had no choice. I started the engine. Slowly, hesitantly, I pulled the bus back onto the road. I didn't dare look back. But I could still feel him. I could still feel his presence, like a shadow looming over me, always just out of sight, but never truly gone. I'm trapped. I don't know if it's the bus, or if it's me. Maybe I was never meant to leave. Maybe I've become part of it, just like the passengers, just like the man in the gray coat. The road stretches on forever, and I keep driving.